now want to welcome Greg Jensen, who will be presenting on crabs and shrimps, their unsung roles in the Salish Sea ecosystems. Gregory Jensen is a biologist and an instructor at the University of Washington, and the author of several books, including Crabs and Shrimps of the Pacific Coast and Beneath Pacific Tides. An avid diver and underwater photographer, he has spent over 5 decades studying the marine life of the Pacific Northwest with a particular interest in crustaceans.
Let me share screen here. All right, thanks for tuning in today to hear about crabs and shrimps. For just one talk like this, it's hard for me to narrow it down just what to focus on when there's so many amazing things about these animals. Their life history, reproduction, growth can go on and on. They're just unusual in so many different ways. For this, I decided to highlight some aspects of their ecology that are little known and dispel some commonly held misconceptions. And hopefully, after this talk, you'll have a greater appreciation for these crustaceans and an appreciation beyond just being something that tastes good. So what do I mean by unsung roles? Well, the usual view of their role is something like the following. And it's not advancing. Interesting. Should advance here in a second. And does this. Come on. Oh boy. There we go. So in this food web, crabs and shrimps are shown as feeding on detritus and algae. So we got decapods here, crabs and the shrimps, and detritus down here at the bottom. And detritus is the term for just tiny decomposing bits of organic material. So they're basically saying that they're scavengers and that their main role, as you see the arrows coming from them, is as food for squid and fish. And we're going to see that there's a lot more to it than just that. So our little shore crabs that are so common on beaches around here are a good example of a kind of an omnivorous and opportunistic feeder. The bulk of their diet consists of tiny algae and diatoms that are on the surface of the rocks, and their claws are very well adapted for scraping those up. So let's see a little video clip here of some striped shore crabs, and they're using these kind of spoon-shaped tips, which are good at cropping things close to the rock. And as you can well imagine, any small newly settled snail or other animal that they come across is also fair game. So, they're able to scour the surfaces of these rocks pretty effectively. Here are some hemigrapsis, some other local shore crabs that are working on a discarded salmon head. And it's scavenging like this that gives people the idea that crabs make their living as scavengers. Here's some red rock crabs and Dungeness crabs feeding on fish remains that were thrown back in the water. And reinforcing the idea that they're scavengers is the fact that fish heads and similar items are used as bait in crab pots. But really, if you think about it, how often in nature do fish heads just appear on the bottom? Scavenging is a really unreliable food source. When a fish or a bird eats a fish, they just swallow it whole. There's no head left behind. So there's nothing really to scavenge. To make a living as a scavenger on land, you need to be able to cover large distances. So think of something like vultures that are able to cover a great expanse of area looking for a carcass. Or alternatively, you shadow a larger predator. So you do something like an Arctic fox following a polar bear around. But in both cases, you know, it's not a food source that a large number of things can rely on, and most things don't have the mobility to take advantage of it. And of course, the crabs in Finding Nemo loitering around on the sewer pipe add to that perception of them as being scavengers, as bottom feeders, whatever you want to call it. So for these reasons, some years back at the beginning of my crustacean biology class, I made the comment that crabs don't get no respect. And the students liked that so much that they ended up at the end of the course designing t-shirts to immortalize the phrase. The thing is that almost any predator will happily take advantage of a free meal, but like I say, scavenging opportunities are relatively few and far between. So what do these animals eat most of the time if they're not scavenging? Well, most of them are predators, especially on the hard-shelled prey like mollusks and barnacles. So here's a graceful crab, which is a medium-sized crab that's often mistaken for a small Dungeness crab, eating a mussel that's just opened. As you'll see, predation by crabs like this has had a profound effect on the distribution, the behavior, and the morphology, or the form, the shape of a lot of these prey species. Here's a helmet crab that's peeling a frilled dogwinkle. So he's working his way in from the opening of the shell until he gets to the sea, kind of how he's chipped away, working back around the spiral of the shell. And even the largest of our snails isn't immune to attack. If you're familiar with moon snails, you know that they have this immense foot. The shell is, a big one is softball sized or larger. And they can actually retract that entire foot into the shell. There's a lot of sinuses in there that are filled with water, and so to retract it in, they have to expel that water. So they can't do it super fast, but they can fit all that inside the shell. So here's a very lucky one that survived an attack by a crab. It's fully retracted into the shell and it's blocking the entrance with its operculum, this kind of horny, hard, brownish thing that's covering the snail. If the crab had gotten just a little bit further, it would have managed to get into this guy, but something must have interrupted it and it dropped it before it actually got the job done. Here's one that wasn't quite so lucky. So you can see how the crab just peeled it back until it got to the snail. So who would do such a thing? Red rock crabs are literally the wrecking balls of our local waters. They have these extremely powerful claws, and a big one like this can easily crush your finger. So you want to be very, very careful handling these. They literally will crush the bone in your finger. In addition to eating moon snails, they also prey on dogwinkles, like you saw in that helmet crab feeding on earlier, and they've had a huge effect on them. Now here's a red rock crab that has chipped it back far enough. Now he's past the operculum, so he's managed to get this moon snail. So here's a frilled dogwinkle, and they're named for these frilly extensions on the shell. when early explorers first found these, the variability in the color and variability in shape resulted in them being named about a dozen different names. When you see a specimen like this, you can see kind of why. I mean, very different looking shell. This seemingly bomb-proof specimen is from an area with lots of red rock crabs. And this is an example of what we call phenotypic plasticity. So this isn't a genetic difference between these snails. It's a response to the presence of crabs. And if you were to take the snail on the left, it has the frills and the relatively thin shell, and move it to an area where there are red rock crabs, it would smell those red rock crabs and start thickening up the opening of its shell as a response to that smell. It's not just snails that are influenced by these predators. Here's a red rock crab digging up a clam. And you can see he's kind of messed up the visibility there as he's stirred up the sediments. Here's one digging. It can be remarkably persistent in pursuing one of these clams. And, on this particular beach, I've tried to dig clams there, and it's really difficult because of all the buried cobbles and everything. And yet this crab will just keep working away, doing the little bulldozer thing, moving sand and rocks aside until he gets down and finally gets to that clam. So on some beaches at low tide, you can actually see kind of these pits, these pock marks that are left behind from when the tide was in and crabs were out there excavating clams. This one has managed to excavate a large butter clam. And here are a couple that are kind of finishing off a large clam that one of them dug up. And it's not the sort of free-for-all that you might expect, as ornery as crabs tend to be. You have a larger one coming in here that's actually quite polite. He sort of checks out what they're doing and doesn't try to push him aside. And just like, oh, okay, carry on. Goes on his way. But this predation on these burrowing clams has had a huge effect on the morphology and the tidal level where clams live. It makes for a really, really interesting pattern. So view this as kind of being the cross section of a beach. So above that top line is the high intertidal, and then you have a middle intertidal and a low and subtidal. High intertidal is underwater for a limited amount of time. The low and subtidal are very infrequently, or in case of subtidal, never exposed at low tide. If you look at distribution of clams on a beach like this, we find that the little neck clams are up in the high part of the beach. In the middle part, we've got the butter clams, a little bit deeper in the sediment and longer siphons so they can reach the surface. And in the lowest parts, we have the horse clams or gapers and gooey ducks. And in the case of, well, actually both of those, the main body of the animal might be 3 feet underground, almost a meter underground. So as you go lower on the beach, the clams are deeper in the sediment, but the deeper they go, then the longer the siphon, the neck they need in order to reach the surface, as they have to use that to draw in water to feed and to breathe. So the big trade-off here is between depth and siphon length and what we call a shell gape, because the bigger the siphon you have, the more of a gape there's going to be in your shell to allow for that siphon. So if we look at a little neck, they have a pretty much, well, because a little neck, small siphon, they seal up very nicely. You look at a butter clam, it's got a bit more of a gape. So this is a vulnerability. So when a crab manages to dig this up, it might be able to get its thumb into that crack there at that gape and get into the shell. And of course, gapers or horse clams, as the name gaper implies, have this huge gape in the shell. Same with gooey ducks. So these last two, if they're uncovered, they're basically helpless. The shell doesn't do them any good. So here we see a couple of gooey ducks on the left and a horse clam, and they're retracted all that they can do. And so gooey duck's got exposed mantle there and neck, and the horse clam's got an exposed neck. Once they're once they're uncovered, they're basically toast. So although a little neck clam like this is shallow in the sediment and easy for the crabs to dig up, there's a very limited amount of time when they're available for the crabs to get to them. Crab has to wait until it's nighttime and a high tide to run up there and dig the clam up. This crab is carrying it off into deeper water where he has time to work on it. And he may pinch it dozens or even hundreds of times, creating little micro cracks in the shell so that eventually it fails and he gets to the meat. So there's this huge biomass of clams, clam meat underneath the sand and mud that's inaccessible to most animals. There's a few starfish that can dig them up, but when a starfish digs up a clam and eats it, he's pretty much got it enveloped, and nobody else can really get a piece of the action, so to speak. But when a crab digs one up, there's all sorts of extra. I mean, it's far more meat than what the crab can eat, and so there's stuff for other animals to take advantage of. So here's a Dungeness crab that has, in this case, it just has opened a mussel and it's mostly eating it, but he's working on it. But you can see that he's attracted a lot of attention. He's got a whole bunch of shiner perch coming in here. There's a little sand dab now coming in. It's also attracted by this. And momentarily, here comes a ratfish. So you can well imagine when a crab digs up a big horse clam and has opened it up, oh, here comes a crab and saying, okay, I want some too. It suddenly makes a whole bunch of calories available to all these other animals that are living in that same environment who have no way of accessing it by themselves. Here's a red rock crab that's feeding on barnacles on a piling. And you can see the area that he's cleared off. So again, just as how sea stars, starfish, open up areas of rock substrate and things like that, kind of making breaks in the monoculture of things like mussels that allow other organisms to exploit those surfaces. Crabs do the same thing. They clear areas that allow for other organisms to settle in and use those areas. The following video clip might be a bit disturbing. So I was on a night dive and I came across a red rock crab that was walking forward several steps and then pouncing on an area of bottom and probing it and then moving forward and repeating that action. And I watched it for a bit, but I never saw it get anything. And then a little later, I came across one right as it made a successful pounce. And the visibility got bad really fast. But as you can see, he's managed to grab a rock sole. And it's basically just in one motion crushed the head of this rock sole. And he's running off with it because he thinks I'm going to try to take it from him, I guess. But get a better view of it here and see just how big the fish is relative to him. So this is not something that's usually recognized because people see these big crabs that are feeding primarily on mollusks and just assume that they're too slow and they're not feeding on fast prey like fish. So when they find fish remains in crab stomachs, they just assume that it's something that the crab scavenged. So these next few photos are ones that I took in the Bahamas of an octopus feeding. And you're probably wondering why I'm suddenly talking about octopuses, but bear with me, it'll make sense momentarily. So octopus moves forward across the bit of seabed and selects an area of bottom. And then it starts spreading out the webbing between its arms. And it envelops an area, kind of like a cast net, and then probes the area with the tips of its arms while collapsing the net. Our local octopuses do this also, and this is called speculative feeding. Basically, the animal doesn't know whether there's actually something there. It's just enclosing an area and seeing if it can find something. So basically what that crab was doing is the equivalent of speculative feeding, where it's walking along and it's pouncing on the bottom. So here's a northern kelp crab. As the name implies, they live on kelp and they feed heavily on it in the summer. Once kelp growth slows down, they eat it faster than it can grow, and eventually they clean it out. So here you can see some in early winter, and they've cropped off the blades of the kelp, so now only the stipe and the float remain. And in the winter, then they switch over to feeding on mussels and barnacles. Here's some that came across an octopus that was dying, and in its weakened condition, there each of them was able to grab one of its arms. So kind of the equivalent of being drawn and quartered, except it's being drawn and octoed. They were jumping the gun a little bit on scavenging. And here's one eating a jellyfish. And they really like eating jellyfish. They grab them from the water as they drift by. They also react the same way to divers. And I'm not sure it's just that they're hyper aggressive and defending themselves, or if they mistake us for a big jellyfish drifting by. But sometimes you come up from a dive and you'll have one glommed onto your back or something. But I've also seen them in the summer doing a similar walk and pounce, a speculative sort of feeding like the red rock crabs are doing. And instead they're targeting large clumps of algae. And I haven't seen them successfully pounce on a clump of algae and get a fish, but on a couple of occasions I've come across them holding live gunnels and eating them tail first. So this is a saddleback gunnel here. And these gunnels like to hang out in clumps of algae. Here's a juvenile northern kelp crab that I came across that was eating a still living pipefish, again, tail first. So these, again, supposedly primarily herbivorous crabs are taking advantage of fish that they can catch. Of course, speculative feeding can score things other than fish, and crabs are known to be cannibals. So here's a graceful crab that has grabbed a juvenile. I was going to take a portrait of the crab, and all of a sudden it's sort of pounced and pulled this little guy out of the sediment. And so this series of pictures are all taken in a period of about 1 minute. You can see that it makes very short work of this poor little guy. It's basically eaten this crab within a minute. Here's a large male red rock crab that's killed a female red rock crab and is eating her eggs. So like I said earlier, the local wrecking ball of a crab, not a creature you want to mess with. And here's another graceful crab eating a shore crab. When you see crab remains with a semicircular piece taken out of the back, like you see here, it's a good indication that the killer was a larger crab. They basically insert one finger of their claw in between the carapace and the abdomen and pry up in order to kill the smaller crab. And when you find shells that are chipped from the edge, that's often an indicator as well that it was a crab that ate the clam. Obviously, you know, seagulls would pick up clams and drop them onto the rocks, but then the shells tend to shatter. When it's neatly chipped like this, then it's usually the work of a crab. So you can learn all about it by tuning into Crab Scene Investigation, Sundays at 9 p.m. Pacific time on CBC. So looking back at our food web, we can see that the role of crabs was a lot more arrows than what we had to begin with. Feeding on bivalves and snails and worms and other crustaceans and even fish. So these crabs are far more than just fish food. They're far more than just something that's converting detritus into something more edible for these larger organisms. And again, digging up clams and making that resource available to fish adds another layer of complexity to their interactions in the ecology of the area. So what about shrimp? Well, we can see in the picture that I used as my title slide, we have dock shrimp taking advantage of the barnacle scraps that are made by this red rock crab. And just like crabs coming to pots, shrimp come to bait, so they get, again, tagged with this scavenger label. They certainly are prey for fish. Almost everything likes to eat shrimp, but is there more in terms of their interactions in the environment? Let's take a look at some of the shrimps. So this is a type of crangon shrimp, and crangons are very common on open soft bottoms, with different species living in areas with different sediment sizes, ranging from mud to coarse sand. And they're very adept at burying themselves in the sand. They're extremely important prey item for Dungeness crabs, and they're also the main thing eaten by newly weaned harbor seals. So here's a crangon that's going to bury itself in the sand, and this is normal speed. It's not sped up or anything, so don't blink or you'll miss it. You can see basically this kind of liquefied the sand with his pleopods and sank right in, and then he does this nice little wipe with his antennae to cover up any trace. Here's one that's buried in the sand and gives you an idea of how well concealed they are in the daytime. There's the eyes are labeled, and there's a little respiratory opening it's got and allows it to breathe while it's buried in the sand like this. So they have these kind of mantis-like claws to grab prey with, and so it's not real surprising that they are predators. Kind of to show how they feed, here's a sequence of photos I took in an aquarium of another type of crangon shrimp, the horned shrimp. This species sits out in the open where, as you'll soon see, it blends in very well. And it's also well protected by the long spines on its body. Here it's about to grab an amphipod, and it's got one really slender pair of legs that actually serve as antennae. They aren't used in walking. And he's got them kind of extended out in front. And as soon as that amphipod bumps into those, then he can strike with those claws that you saw. So here he's grabbed the amphipod, and after subduing it, he turns it so it's head first. Here you can see the claws gripping the amphipod and down the hatch. He basically swallows the amphipod whole. And here you can see the amphipod curled up in the stomach of the shrimp. You can see its head and eye there. Here's one in the field. And again, you can see how well it blends in, sitting in amongst the hydroids and things like that. Here's one of the more conventional crangons that has grabbed a large worm, polychaete, and thing is way too big for him to swallow. He swallowed as much of it as he can, and he's just going to kind of keep working on that. So at least these crangonids have a decent pair of claws to grab stuff with. But what about all those other shrimp that look like they don't even really have claws? And you look at something like this pink shrimp, and you know it's got to be pretty wimpy, right? I mean, this guy looks like he doesn't just skip leg day at the gym, but he's not going at all. Well, here's one with a pretty good sized polychaete, and the following video shows a sort of a feeding frenzy of pink shrimp eating large worms that were swarming at night. And it's kind of low quality video, but at least it'll give you an idea of what was going on. You can kind of see some swimming by carrying worms, and then the video will pause here and you can see some like 3 of them in the front here all holding a worm, and behind them is one that has a worm, and then off to the left a bit is another one with a worm. So these are perfectly capable of subduing pretty substantial prey, even though they don't have obvious claws. This is a dock shrimp. If you go to almost any marina at night and shine a light on the pilings, you'll see their eyes glowing back at you. And again, pretty harmless looking, right? Well, here's one attacking a newly molted porcelain crab. So the crab has just shed its exoskeleton, so it's soft shelled, and the shrimp discovered it. And as you'll see, he's making, again, short work of it. Again, granted the crab is soft shelled, but you wouldn't expect those tiny feet to do so much damage. He's basically reaching inside with these very, very tiny claws and pulling chunks of this crab out. So there are literally scores of different species of shrimps in our area, these smaller shrimps. And in almost all cases, we have no idea what they feed on, but it's likely that most of them are predators, at least to some extent. Just show you a few slides of some of the different ones, just to give you an idea of their diversity. and their color. Some of them are pretty fancy. So again, while they're certainly prey for fish, they likely play much larger roles than that of merely converting detritus into fish food. All right, so it's well known that in the tropics there are both fish and shrimps that set up cleaning stations where larger fish line up to be serviced. And the cleaners will go inside the mouths and gills and eat any parasites. Cleaning behavior wasn't discovered until scientists were able to spend long periods of time underwater, something that's only practical in warm tropical places. So it's always been assumed that the long periods of stability of coral reef ecosystems has allowed for these kinds of specializations to develop. But it turns out there's evidence for similar behaviors here in our cold waters. So here's a shrimp that I described some time back, and I named it cleaner leviad because it has often been seen inside the mouths of things like rockfish and lingcod, serving as a cleaner. Here's a photo a friend of mine took up in Canada of one on a lingcod. You can see it under his chin there. Also wanted to mention, we have a very diverse family of armor-plated fishes in our area called poachers. And on quite a few occasions, I've seen poachers approach shrimps or hermit crabs, and they kind of present themselves to them. They turn sideways to the hermit crab and kind of just become completely still, stiffen up their body. And the crab will kind of like curiously start poking at them and prodding them and picking things off of them. And they'll even roll the fish completely over, and the fish doesn't move at all. And fish is well protected from the crab with this armor, but he's also kind of getting a cleaning. And so this may be, in a sense, kind of a how cleaning behaviors get started. Oh, here's a close-up of the head of a northern spearnose poacher, and you can see a whole bunch of parasitic isopods, excuse me, on top of its head. All right, so a more common and familiar species that's been observed in apparent cleaning behavior is the commercially and recreationally important spot prawn. In the dome at the Seattle Aquarium, biologists have noted that when they put spot prawns in, the deeper water rockfishes, like this China rockfish, will approach them and display in a manner that looks like they're asking to be cleaned. And of course, the shrimp are way too stressed out, having just been handled and stuff to behave normally, so they haven't seen actual cleaning behavior. And also at the same time, the shallow water rockfish, things like the brown rockfish, are trying to eat those shrimp. So that sort of throws a monkey wrench into it as well. But here is a photograph that was recently taken of by a diver at White Cliff, so by Vancouver, of a spot prawn inside the mouth of a lingcod, picking away at stuff. So tropical waters don't have the monopoly on these neat behavioral and ecological adaptations. It's just that they're more easily observed there. And now with more remote sensing and recording methods becoming available, I think we're going to have a better means to discover the sorts of interactions that are going on in colder waters. So it's likely that most of you have seen something in the news about the crab form evolving in multiple lineages. Why everything seems to be eventually become a crab. And it's also shown up a lot in memes and cartoons or comics and things like that. So in light of all the good press crabs have been getting recently, is my t-shirt no longer accurate, that they don't get no respect? Well, I'm going to argue that technically, since don't get no is a double negative, it's saying that they do get respect. So it's all good. Still, crabs are not getting the recognition they deserve in terms of the many roles that they play in marine ecosystems. I like this quote: "If we live out our span of life on Earth without ever knowing a crab intimately, we've missed having a jolly friendship. Life is a little incomplete if we can look back and recall these small people as only as supplying the course after soup and with the chablis." Hopefully this talk has made you more aware of all the research opportunities and all the things that aren't currently known about these neat little people. And hopefully you'll have a chance to get to know them better. Just a quick note about some of the books that are available. All of these books are available in Canada through a company called Alibris, so that our Libris.com is the best way to order them. If you're in the US, obviously you can get them through Amazon, or you can get them through my website, molamarine.com. If you were to order from Mola Marine for me to mail directly to you, the cost is insane. It basically costs as much as the book in order for the postage to Canada. Whereas Alibris, I ship the books to Alibris, and they do some kind of mass importation thing, and the cost is a fraction of that. So definitely, if you want any of these books, which not surprisingly I recommend, order them from Canada through Alibris. And also at Mola Marine, there are free sculpin and flatfish identification ebooks you can download. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg. That was a wonderful presentation. Yeah, I can see some questions in the chat here. Kim was asking, aside from bigger crabs, what else preys on crabs?
Well, octopus, obviously. Well, it depends on the size of the crab. So, the smaller crabs are eaten by some of the fish, some of the things like surf perches and some of the sculpins. Cabezon, which is an extremely large sculpin, can eat quite large crabs. And then, of course, octopus eat crabs, and sea otters, and at low tide, raccoons will come down and forage for them. Those are probably the main things. And seagulls, of course, too. They find one out at low tide, they'll flip it over and peck the sternum and kill them that way. So.
Cool. I have another question here. Is there a difference between prawn and shrimp, or can these terms be used interchangeably?
So the terms prawn and shrimp, it depends on what part of the world you're in. So in Europe, they call so there's two kind of basic body forms of shrimp. You saw the crangons that were sort of flattened, the ones that were burying in the sand, and then you saw the spot shrimp that I showed. Very different body types. Well, in Europe, one of those they call a shrimp and one they call a prawn. But here in North America, we tend to call anything that's larger a prawn and something that's smaller a shrimp. And in Australia, I think they're kind of go the same way, although they tend to. So there's a couple different lineages of things that look like shrimp but are not really related to each other. So when they do that thing, come on down, we'll throw another shrimp on the barbie for you. In some places, that kind of shrimp, which we don't have around here, are what they call prawns, and things that are like the shrimp we have here, they call shrimp. And so it's neither of them, none of them are scientific terms, and where you are depends on what people call things. And, there's no real difference other than different species between a spot shrimp and a dock shrimp. But, in many cases, people call spot shrimp spot prawns because they're the biggest. So it's very confusing.
Yeah, that's interesting. It depends where you are. That makes sense. Okay, let's see. We have another question here from Joan. One day in August, on a calm high tide, I was wading in the Salish Sea shore and looking into the water. There were what looked like thousands of shore crabs moving sideways left to right next to my feet, all at high tide. We watched them move for about an hour. It seemed like a migration. Do you know what was going on? The following evening, there was no shore crabs at high tide.
It's funny because a former student of mine who then served as a TA for me up at Banfield emailed me, I don't know, a couple months ago, asking almost the same question. He's up there in Canada, and he was at a beach, and all the shore crabs were migrating or whatever the same direction, and he was asking me, what that's about, and I haven't a clue.
Interesting.
Makes it fun.
Yeah.
We got some more questions in the chat. Annette was wondering, why are shrimp so brightly colored, almost neon?
Well, that's one of the things that I always like to talk about, but I didn't have time to talk about. And you have to keep in mind that, those pictures I took are taken underwater with a flash. And when you go underwater, as soon as you get down, just not very deep at all, different wavelengths of light get filtered out. And so red is the first thing to go. And so without a dive light or a flash or anything like that, if you're down there and you have a shrimp that is say transparent with fancy red markings all through its body, it basically looks like a hydroid or something. There's, because the red is just gray and the transparent is transparent, and so they blend in remarkably well. So it's a little misleading when you see pictures like I showed you, but if I showed them, as a fish sees them, they'd be pretty boring looking.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. Mary mentioned that you said that the red rock crab had a smell that caused the thickening of the periwinkle shell. Could you go over that process again for us?
Well, they're able to, most of these animals have some sense of smell. If you have those dog winkles in a tank and, there's nothing going on there, just all sitting there still, and then you drop a mussel in the tank, it's amazing. That's just within minutes almost, they'll come awake and start searching because they can smell that live mussel. And similarly, they can smell live red rock crab. The crabs are giving off scents, they urinate, they do various things. And so there's a smell that they recognize as a threat. And so they reduce their activity level and instead start putting their energy towards adding extra material to the aperture of their shell. As as far as exactly what it is they're smelling, I can't say, but yeah, they know whether crabs are around or not.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us. This was a really great presentation, and we have lots of really great positive feedback in the chat. It's always nice to scroll through. Yeah, so thank you so much. I am really excited to welcome our next two speakers for the second half of the evening. Anne Parkinson, who will be answering the question, do insects live in the saltwater of the Salish Sea? And Sheila Byers, who will tell us about the weird and wonderful world of worms. Anne Parkinson is a marine biologist with a 40-year career beginning as a research diver and high school biology teacher, moving into private sector abalone aquaculture, and followed by public sector research officer, and finally 20 years as the University of Victoria Biology Cooperative Education Coordinator. She is the chair of Marine Stewardship of Transition Salt Spring, who is currently hosting Wonders of the Salish Sea. And Sheila Byers is a registered professional biologist, a marine biologist, and a long-term volunteer member of Nature Vancouver's Marine Biology section, and is part of the Wonders of the Salish Sea Planning Committee. As well, she sits on the board of directors of Marine Life Sanctuary Society and currently works at the Beaty Biodiversity Museum as the curatorial assistant for the marine invertebrate collection. And I'll pass it over to you, Anne.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'll just do a quick screen share. Well, thank you. Good evening, everybody. So glad you could all join. And I have really been looking forward to this because this was the topic of my master's thesis. And it's both the research that I did and the publication, which was in the late 70s. Oh my gosh, so that makes me so old. Anyway, I've been really having fun revisiting and trying to catch up on more current research, of which, not surprising, there's very little, almost none. So this is your moment to learn about a very unique species of the Salish Sea that you will not find in a book or online. Very unique, as I say. And you will be able to watch possibly the only ever video recording of a live marine chironomid. So, all right, let's go and start. I'll go over, how many marine insects there are. We'll meet the chironomid, go over the life cycle, where it's found, and then I'll get into what I'm calling ecophysiology, which I shall explain. And it's basically the evolution and adaptation of this wonderful little insect. So when I did a quick scan, and thank you, Sheila, who's speaking next, because of all her work at the Beaty, she did discover that recently, from about 2000 on, there has been a bit of a new species of insect found, a fly, that actually preys on marine barnacles. But I can't actually find out how marine it is. I haven't been able to dig in, but that's about the only new one. And very few species. The only other one, which was absolutely known when I was doing my thesis, is they're called ocean skaters. Phenomenal. They spend their entire lives on the surface of the ocean, way far offshore. And again, there's only a few, and the same person at Scripps, she's been investigating these species for, 30, 40 years. So really fascinating bunch. But that's it. So let's meet the chironomid, which there's your pronunciation. It's just a tiny little fly, so I'm sorry, this isn't going to be a very exciting slideshow. But it has your typical insect life cycle. It goes from an egg through a larva, which does several molts in stars, up into a pupa where it metamorphoses and poof, emerges as an adult with wings. So the thing is, it's the insects are a vast, and varied. The Diptera flies are just everywhere, all over the world. But these little chironomidae are also called non-biting midges. So they resemble mosquitoes, but if you are on the intertidal and you run into this little bug, don't worry, it's not going to bite. You don't have to shoosh him away. They're fine. There's at least 20,000 species of these chironomids worldwide, every kind of environment you can imagine. So it's very unique for us to have actually 2 species of chironomids in our marine environment. And they do go from, Northern California up through the Salish Sea into Alaska. And they are in that biome of the intertidal. So let's take a look at the life cycle. This is pretty funny because these are my hand-drawn illustrations, because in those days, you didn't really have a cell phone to just go bling bling and take pictures or even take a video camera. It was a huge, ridiculous. So here we are, a little larva. Here's the pupa close up. They really are quite unique and you grow to like them. And then here's the adult. And if you'll notice these little circles in here, and I'm assuming everyone can see my pointer, full of eggs, and we'll go over that. It'll either be egg in here or the male sperm. All of these are like 1 millimeter. We're talking your baby fingernail. So where are you going to find them? Well, here are the 2 species, Paraclunio alaskensis and Sondiria, which they're still figuring out which subspecies of those. So the larva will be in the upper tidal, 3 feet and below a little bit, not super deep, but not up in the dry, high barnacle zone. They're very solid rock only. You'll never find them on a beach, pebbly, anything that's going to roll around. They are in that green algae zone. So ulva species, which you'll be familiar with, the flat sheets of green. And also this other one, which is a green, but it's more sort of spaghetti-ish. And they anchor themselves in tubes that they make. They can be quite silvery if they aren't covered with too much flotsam and stuff. And those are on the rock, and you might see a little dark head, brown head poking out. Also, if you look around, you'll probably see a bit of fresh water. I think they like to be in areas where there's some land runoff. So the pupa remains in the tube to do its metamorphosis, and the adult then emerges around a low tide. We're talking wings here, not fins. So very poor flyers, but they can be in very high numbers at extreme low tides in January at the night and August during the day. And that is important. So try and remember that. So a previous grad student to me did a lot on the distribution of these 2 species. So that is well known, but nothing much on the physiology. And of course, if you're going to go out to the intertidal, I'm sure you're all going to run out there and try and find, you will be on your hands and knees with your face right up to the rock, and tweezers will probably help. It's great fun. I've done a lot. So I call it the forever young life cycle. We all know about butterflies, right? The adult doesn't tend to live that long, but this species is amazing. So for several months, the larvae will be in the low tide, but covered with water most of the time. So tiny little yellow egg into a teeny larva. Those molt, as I said, sheds their skin, makes the tube, eats diatoms, good mouth parts adapted for scraping up the rocks. And then the pupa will be several weeks, and this is very dependent on temperature. So in the summer, this may go faster, and the whole life cycle. In the winter, a little slower when it's colder. But the adult, this is amazing. They emerge all at once. So you can imagine all the eggs were laid a long time ago, right at the low tide. It's a super low tide. All of the adults emerge, called synchronous emergence. They have no gut, no mouth. They don't eat, they don't drink, they basically run around as egg or sperm sacs. And so they scamper around on the rocks fast, mate. It is sexual reproduction. And the female lays a tiny bright yellow egg and on it goes. The adults all die as the tide comes up. So this is a 6-hour adult life cycle. Good heavens. Anyway, what then is the answer to why this insect, when there are so many insects around the world, so many flies, why have they been able to slip into the marine environment? So first of all, really, what is a marine organism? You have to kind of think about that, right? I mean, whales have lungs and breathe air. Definitely Greg, who just went over all the crabs, yeah, they have gills. They live absolutely 24/7. They wouldn't survive going out on land. So, marine to me means, a large chunk of their life cycle, at least, is in the water, not just borrowing it, but in. So this is what I wanted to figure out. How does it handle the intertidal? And there are several conditions that need to be met, barriers, you might almost call them. Definitely the waves and the surf. That's a fly, this is pretty crazy. It's salty, so can they eat and drink all that salt water and still be okay, even though they're, maybe mostly fresh water? Some exceptions. Tides, you've got to deal with air half the time, water the other half. And of course, the wind. You're trying to fly and mate. What are you going to do on a stormy beach? And now maybe recently the heat dome. So maybe there's other temperature considerations coming up. It's harsh. So to match that up, I'd like to take a moment, go back almost to elementary school, but you can do this for all species, not just marine. What is a body function? What is physiology? And when you Google, some sites, there's this organizational, way of doing things, the top 5, the top 8, the top this, and da, da, da. So, basically in summary, this is what all living things do. Not a rock, not a drop of water. This is living things. So you probably remember some of this. You have to move and respond, use energy, eat nutrition of some kind. It might even be sunlight and some minerals. Yeah, some sort of fluid, some kind of a gas to breathe. We all grow, age, and die. Yeah, and we have to reproduce, or there will be none of us left. That's absolute must. So if we call ecophysiology, it's almost like evolution. It's the adaptations of the physiology to the environment in order to allow an organism to survive. So if we take each of these just quickly, which I kind of did with my own thesis. So to move, you've got to adapt somehow to this wave and surf problem and the wind, which I'll talk about later too. So building the tube, brilliant. Lots of insects do that, even freshwater aquatic ones. But they do have these cute little, sorry, that's just me. I think they're cute, pseudopods, which are like little hook-like claws. And not all chironomids have those. So I think that's a bit of an extra adaptation. To eat and drink, of course, very salty. And this is quite unique. So they're ingesting everything there. They're drinking the salt water. They rarely get access to fresh. And so somehow they must be what's called osmoregulating, meaning that the water and the salt balance in their body is adequate to survive there. Or my question was, maybe they're armoring up. Maybe they're hardly even dealing with their environment. So I did a series of experiments to show that, nope, they are actively pumping salt and water in and out and maintaining a certain balance. And then how do they breathe? They're fighting air and water half the time. Barnacles, of course, just close up, armored. But that is not what the chironomid can do. So without gills, what they do, very smart, they tuck a little air bubble in the tube, and that gets them through each of the high tides. They don't breathe through air tubes. They have no holes in their skin, or epidermis, which a lot of insects do. But they have very thin cuticles skin layer at the joints. And I did some labeling with a special kind of heavy water and spectrophotometer and so on to show that they were actually moving water in and out and of the joints. So I think that was one of their unique adaptations. And they grow and age and die with a typical insect life cycle, which does actually suit the environment that they're in, half in the air, half in water. And then to reproduce, they had a couple of good adaptations. The larval life matches the exact time between very low tides of each year, dependent on the temperature. So if you add it up, low tides in August to January is shorter than low tides from January to August. And that is temperature related. Wow. That's a massively wonderful evolution. And the other thing I discovered, which I have never forgotten, is that when you put wind graphs together, here in the Salish Sea, January is as calm as August. And I know that's hard to believe. You think of winter storms, but in fact, we have less wind in a calm January month than we do any other month. Amazing. And that allows them to emerge as adults and get around fast enough to mate without getting blown off the shore. So that's sort of the long and the short of it all. Here's my final answer after that research. I decided, yes, for sure, they are living in the salt water and adapting to it. They're not just armoring up and trying to avoid the ocean. And so they're very similar to other aquatic insects. And when we say even an aquatic insect, we call mosquitoes, in a sense, we think of them as being on land organism, but all their larvae have to be in water, right? But they have an air tube. So they haven't, they don't really live in the water. They still breathe the air. Very interesting. And so these tubes that they build are excellent for respiration, anchoring, and keeping both the larvae and the pupa safe. And the adults have adapted to the aerial to facilitate the reproduction. And their marine adaptations that I think are really unique is this cuticle that they've been able to specialize, I believe, and also their life timing, how they do their cycle. So the other thing is that, not every insect has been studied in order to see all these adaptations and this evolution. And I don't think there would be any archaeological evidence. I mean, that would be marvelous. How long have these chironomids lived in our Salish Sea? And they were only discovered in the 20s. They were never even known before that. So all of these are, interesting questions to consider. And doing the osmoregulation study was quite complex with a lot of equipment and micro. You can only imagine, how do you get a little drop of hemolymph out of a larva that's only a millimeter? So all of that was very interesting, challenging. And my supervisor, Richard Ring, it was just a great experience. It was marvelous to work with him. So I have got, hopefully everything works. Here is the site where I did my research. So it's down at the breakwater in Victoria, Ogden Point. And you can see the green, and they're on the wall up here. And mainly I chose this because it was easy access rather than trucking out to the West Coast somewhere. All right, so we're on the step. I hope you can hear me. Watch for the adults. Keep your eyes peeled. And you see him or her scurrying about there. Did you see that one? There goes one over there. Yeah, here you go. Can you follow that? All right. So next time you go out, you know what you're looking for. And yeah, there's another. All right. And that environment, you can see how rough and ready it is. My goodness, that's quite an accomplishment. And so world premiere. Let's go to the next one. Here's more of a close-up of one of the larvae. And that's the size of a barnacle, you can see. And so here is, hopefully, come on, there we go. just, again, we're looking at about 1.5 millimeters. Yes, I know it looks like a maggot, but I call it a larva. And they are everywhere, very dense numbers. Once your eyes get used to them, you begin to realize, aha, that's another one. So I hope you will go to the shore and see if you can find one. I don't think we have any idea what role they play in the food web. I did go snorkeling occasionally during a high tide and was surprised to find that they could crawl out into the higher tide water out of their tube. And I'm quite sure they would get picked off by fish. So I don't know any gut analysis of fish or any way to tell what their role is in the ecosystem, but they're very important in aquatic and other environments. So I would guess they have a role here. So that's the most of it. So happy chironomid hunting. And I hope that you have learned about a whole new species when you think about walking around on the intertidal. Anyway, thank you. Questions after Sheila speaks.
Great. I'll pass it over to Sheila.
Wonderful. How exciting to be following crabs and shrimps and these unusual insects that are living in the ocean. And here we're going to introduce you to another group of marine invertebrates that are called annelids or annelida, which means segmented worms or rings around the body. And you can see from these particular images that there's lots of rings around these bodies. Not so much here, but they're there underneath all the fuzzy fur, so to speak. So they are segmented worms. These three groups together inhabit areas all the way from glaciers on top of mountains down to the canyons in the ocean. So they cover just a myriad of habitats. And it was interesting to find that Linnaeus, who was around in the 1700s, actually identified and named these particular groups. So the earthworm, the medicinal leech, and the sea mouse. So that's pretty interesting to me in the sense of how long annelids have been known. But earlier than that, Shakespeare actually allowed the clown to, I don't know, congratulate Cleopatra of the joy of the worm. And that was in Shakespeare 16, what am I? I've got to move my title here. 1607. So pretty amazing to me that people were aware of worms that long ago. However, my interest is primarily in the polychaetes. So that's what I'm going to focus on from here on in, because they're spectacular. They're actually incredibly beautiful, and there are different types. There's swimmers, there's crawlers and swimmers, there's crawlers, there's burrowers like this. Look at the size of the jaws. But burrowing in the sediments, there's something we might refer to as a sea flower that lives in a tube that it builds. And then we go all the way to the depths of hydrothermal vents with these particular incredibly tolerant in an extreme environment type of worm. So in BC, or I should say off the Pacific Northwest, the coast, we have some 835, I think it is 36 species. Whereas, did I mention, I'm going to do it anyway, these three groups are about 21,000. So in fact, the polychaetes make up a good 12,000 out of that. So the crawlers and the oh my goodness, they're just so diverse, but they're not just beautiful. They are in fact important. And I liked what Gregory mentioned about worms. I want to coin this phrase, worms don't get no respect here either. I won't take it, but I'll just refer to it because I liked it. But if we look at the community, for example, if I went down to False Creek here and I took a sampling of I don't know, meter square of the bottom, the sediments on the bottom, and there were all kinds of different species in there, like crabs and shrimp and clams, worms, a whole lot of other organisms. Of all of those, with the worms would be making up 45 to 50% of the species diversity. That's pretty incredible. Furthermore, if you were to count all of the individuals in all of those different groups, you would find that polychaetes are 80% dominant in terms of the abundance. So they're incredibly important in the ocean. There are some actually that live in estuaries and maybe freshwater, one group, but they do a lot to decompose the organic matter. And in doing that, they're also turning over sediments or bioturbating, in which case they're introducing oxygen and recycling nutrients into the soil. That's just one of the many services, ecological services that they provide to those communities, as well as the health of the sediment, improving the health. Now, I've named a bunch of prey items here and predators, but I think what I want to say, their diversity is so incredible that, and their habitats are so diverse that really a food web would be sorely missing worms, and many of the predators that feed on them would be sorely missing that food source as well. So we're talking them eating anything. Well, they're herbivores, they're omnivores, they're herbivores, predators. Okay, so like every kind of worm has a different approach to living, but the predators can be anywhere from the intertidal area into the upper layers of the pelagic areas of the ocean, all the way down to the depths of the oceans, and even things like gray whales are feeding on them, baleen whales at the surface are feeding on them, and guess what? Humans as well. So extremely important all the way around to the ocean's food web in general. But I have to say that I'm also fascinated with their modes of reproduction. So I want to zero in on that. I'm going to give two examples, but let's just get an idea here of general, very simple form of a worm, because it's important for you to recognize these rings or segments all the way down the body. Here's the head up here with some tentacles that are primarily sensory. And then these parapodia or feet, I'll probably refer to either or. Notice that they're just sticking out from the side of these segments, and at the very tips will be setae or spikes that have a whole lot to do with movement and helping to burrow. They also will be, well, wherever they're living, they become important in the habitats. But notice the parapodia all the way down to the tail, or what we would call the pygidium, and also note that this is actually the youngest part of the worm, the oldest being associated with the head and the first or second segment after that. So that's a very general, but if we go a little bit deeper and look at kind of a side view of the worm, this is the back up here. And so the stomach area, you could say, is down here, the ventrum. The parapodia are usually two sections, one being the notopodia, which is basically the upper one, and the neuropodia, which is the lower one or the ventral one. And you can see that there are bundles of these setae that are coming out from each of those sections of the feet or the parapodia. So that gives you an idea. These dorsal suri can take on different shapes, and that will show up momentarily in the example that I want to provide of a sea nymph of the family Nereidae, and that name supposedly was brought on because of the Greek god Nereus, a sea god who was the father of many sea nymphs, and apparently these Nereids or sea nymphs, well, not apparently, they are very abundant intertidally and common. So that's supposedly how this family name came about. So we are going to look at the banner sea nymph, which I can find right down in Stanley Park very easily, one of the very common ones. This is the head, palps, sensory tentacles. Here's your segments all the way down. The posterior end is somewhere in here, a little bit blurred off, covered, but those pointy dorsal suri that was in that previous image are these little, what I call flags. They're a different shape, but you can see them quite clearly here and along here. So we'll call this the banner sea nymph, although there are other common names, the clam worm, the Pauline worm, and the, oh goodness, what's the other one? Ragworm. But I'm going to continue with the banner. And they're about 30 centimeters in length. That's about 12 inches, and their lifespan is about 1 year. But if we look in a little bit more detail of the head, you can see that it has 2 pairs of eyes. There are those tentacles and palps. But they have kind of a tongue-like, tongue-like piece that unfolds, pushes out into the water or into the sediment where they're feeding, and you will see the very dark jaws at the very end. So yes, they can pinch, but there is an inner ring of teeth and an outer ring of teeth. And if we look at it from the bottom side, you can see that these teeth are different sizes, different rows and numbers in the rows, same here, and actually different patterns. And those patterns actually become very critical in terms of identifying the different species of the Nereus. But let's get to the reproduction. So they are, the mode is what we would call epigamy, and that word just means that their entire bodies go through modifications when they are getting ready to reproduce. And during that reproduction period, they perform this incredibly precisely timed nuptial dance. It's very cool. I haven't seen it, but it reads very cool. So here's some images of ones that were taken by Bernie and Andy in their Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest volume. This one is, I'm guessing, is male because that looks like milked or sperm. And I'm guessing this is a female with part of the body developed, modified, but not entirely. But the process is started by light, and it's the time of day, perhaps a full moon. It could be conditions of the tide. It could be temperature. When all of those environmental factors fall into place for this particular species, then the modified worms, and by the way, they, like I say, entirely modified, the gut is retracted, The body gets thicker and heavier, the musculature. The CD will fall off and new ones will form that provide these paddle-like structures, which I'll show you shortly. Their eyes get bigger. Like, it's just a complete transformation. It's pretty amazing. So the reason I put this section of the image here is that this is a light trap, light trap, as part of the Hackeye Salish Sea program, where a number of these were set up around the coast. This one was in False Creek, and excuse me, and Kira, oh, good, okay. Kira pulled these out of the light box, the light trap. And think about it, these light traps are only about 1 meter below the surface of the water, and they have lights. So all of these banner sea nymphs were attracted to the light box and trapped within it. Now, coincidentally, Allie, who is part of our Wonders of the Salish Sea group, caught these in the same light trap project in Horseshoe Bay. But look at these paddle-shaped setae here and parapodia that allows them to swim. Now, I've read that they form a green egg-shaped egg that, sorry, not egg, but kind of a mucousy ball that falls to the bottom of the ocean. I've never seen it. Allie found this in the light trap, but also look at this. So when they're dancing this nuptial dance, and the conditions are right, the male will let go, broadcast essentially the sperm, and the female picks up that hormone and throws out her eggs. And so because they're in that close association of the nuptial dance, the sperm actually fertilize the eggs, and the female in the meantime is secreting a very gelatinous mucus that encompasses all of those eggs and hardens up or becomes more firm, and the weight of it usually causes them to fall to the bottom of the ocean. So finally, I get to see what I read, this supposed chicken-size egg mass. And the juveniles are going to be with egg yolk, and presumably at about 2 or 3 segments, they will start to crawl out and repeat the cycle of growing as an adult at the bottom of the ocean in the seabed sediments before they repeat the whole cycle. Okay, some kayakers in the crowd maybe have seen another relative that used to be called Anarius, but is now called Alita, when they're kayaking. And in this case, Mark Young saw them in April, as a matter of fact, in 2005. These are not 30-centimeter lengths. These can grow to 1.5 meters. That's 5 feet. Can you imagine? And you might be able to tell from the foot here that this worm is large, which means also that their jaws are very large. So they're probably not going to be eating anything. And by the way, I neglected to mention that once the banner sea nymph sends out their sperm and their eggs, the whole entire body wall is ruptured. So they don't live. They are done. They spawn and they're done. So it's quite a dramatic reproductive method all in all. But moving on to a different species, that's a tube dweller and a burrower. And I like to call them the marine gardeners of family Arenicolidae. So anybody who's gone out to Boundary Bay, and I suspect probably also across in Semiahmoo Bay or elsewhere in Washington and BC, these eelgrass beds have a very distinctive, let's say, pile of sediment that is generally very well coiled. And you can see them here. And guess what? It's called poop piles, and that's what a worm called a lugworm produces. So if we take a look at the lugworm, it's very colorful. It's the head is at this end, and there's bundles of, well, you can barely see the parapodia here with the CD extending out of it. There's a middle section with gills or branchii and CD. The branchii are red because their blood contains hemoglobin. And then the posterior part, which has no CD. But also notice the very rough, rugose kind of cuticle, or it's not really a cuticle on these, let's just say skin. And that probably is helping them to burrow, because that's what they're doing. They're burrowing. They can be about 15 centimeters in length or 6 inches, and they can live for about 1 to 2 years. Close up of that egg sac full of tiny little fertilized embryos growing, but I want you to notice that it's attached. Okay, where is that? What's the lugworm doing? It's burrowing and making these J-shaped, mucus-lined, semi-permanent burrows. So here's your worm. That's the head end. That's the posterior end. It is using its parapodia and CD to burrow its way forward by contracting its longitudinal muscles. But curiously, the circular muscles in the body are actually moving water from the poop pile here down through the burrow right into the end of the burrow, so the gills are getting lots of oxygen, and the sediment at this end is getting a bit, what you could say, slurry, like a slurry, and that's exactly what the worm wants, because it will actually consume that volume of wet sediment, take out of it microorganisms such as ciliates and flagellates, bacteria, lots of bacteria. And in fact, the bacteria actually helps to decompose those microorganisms. And so the worm gets that digested material, organic matter, and probably also some of the bacteria are digested at the same time. And then when it's ready to defecate, it backs up the tube, and the tail comes out, and it does this very neat and tidy coiled poop pile. And of note, if that tail is out a little bit too long, a fish is probably going to come by and nip it off. But nonetheless, back to the head of the burrow, because this slurry is now getting consumed by the worm, the sediments above it are starting to collapse downwards, which means that at the very surface, you're getting a depression in the top of the sediment. Now I'm including this is certainly a relative from the Atlantic, but I want to note that this green area in the upper part towards the surface of the sediment is well oxygenated, but note that the worms are well below that in the anoxic sediment. So that becomes really important when you consider that these worms can change burrows every 3 to 12 days. So they're moving a lot. They're moving a lot of sediments around. All the nutrients from what they defecate, which will include a lot of organic material, is now going to be available to things like clams and sand dollars. So they really are moving the sediment a lot, and purportedly in about, I think, down to about 10 centimeters, they can turn that all over in about 100 days. So that's pretty incredible. But that's why seeing all those poop piles, and maybe I should excuse my using that phrase, but they are, why you see so many in bays like Boundary Bay. So taking a look at the top again, here's your poop pile that's been disrupted a bit by incoming or outgoing tide. Here's the depression. There's another depression here. I have to say it's very difficult to know which depression belongs to which poop pile, but they are definitely evident. And here's your egg sac, and it's holding on with that particular, holding on to the inside of the female burrow. So in fact, there are males and there are females, and apparently the male will release, again, environmental conditions have to be right. They are releasing the sperm, which on an incoming tide allows the sperm to be moving in and around all of the other burrows, so that some of the sperm are going to burrow down into the tube of the female. That triggers the female to actually release her eggs, and they are fertilized inside the tube, and excuse me, and then somehow she forms that glutinous ball that moves outside and remains there until such time as the larvae have been old enough to escape. So that's a really fast example of only 2 of the 836 worms that have quite different reproductive methods, but of course they're in completely different habitats. And I'm going to push right by this. That's just showing the J-shaped tube and the surface of the sediment and what the worm looked like. And close with, you have made your way from worm to man, and much within you is still worm. And that's Nizinski saying that. We barely even touched how diverse these organisms are. So thank you. I'm sorry I'm a little bit over time here, but I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was awesome.
Great.
We have a few minutes for questions as well. So if anyone has questions, feel free to put those in the chat. But I'll read out the first one. And this was a question for Sheila. And how are humans feeding on these worms?
Oh, goodness. So that one at the very beginning that I mentioned, the jaws, that might have been hard to see, but it was the burrowing in the sand. They can be, probably well over 1 meter in size. And that's one of the favorites of humans. So there's a special way that they are able to capture them. And that's in the marine world. In the more estuarine or freshwater area, there are ones that are called pololo worms. Some are in the rice fields. And so when they are, again, reproducing by the environmental conditions and they're swimming up into the water, higher up into the water, that's when they go out with their nets, usually at night, and net the worms. I have not tried that, and I don't think I ever will, but lots of people enjoy them. So it's amazing. They're very popular in Indonesia area, Samoa, places like that, where these worms are quite abundant.
Great. I see another question also for Sheila, but if anyone does have any questions for Anne, feel free to put those in the chat too. But this one was from Emily. Do you have any ID books or resources that you recommend for polychaetes and annelids?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would say, Bible looks like this. If you can see that, it's by Rouse, Fligel, and Tillich, and it's 2022. It has incredible photographs, incredible details. It's pretty worldwide, so it's not really specific, but otherwise it would be Andy Lamb and Bernie Hanby more locally with this book, which is The Marine Life of the Pacific Northwest. So those are the 2 that I would recommend. Rick Harbo's field guidebooks have some information on worms as well, as does Dwayne Sett. Yeah, so there's information. Oh, cause law from way back when. Yeah, has lots in it too. So it's there's good sources. Those are the best, I would say.
What
Could you say the name of the first one again? We just couldn't quite see it.
Okay, sorry, it's called Annelid.
There we go. Thank you.
Yes.
And I think we'll do one more question. Can you describe, and I believe this was also for Sheila, so please correct me if I'm wrong. Can you describe how they change burrows every 3 to 12 days and the timing with tides and predation?
Oh my, I don't think I can really directly answer that. It's they burrow a lot for sure. I mean, if they're turning over sediments every, well, that depth over 100 times, 100 days, entire bays are going to be turned over, which, you know, that's how they're distributing all of this or renewing the oxygen in the sediments where they're anoxic. So they're just constant burrowers, and their microorganisms are totally abundant in sediments as well as on the surface. So they're just feeding all the time. And I guess they like to move around. Maybe what they're getting in one burrow is no longer providing the supply of microorganisms at the surface that it was. And so they have to move further around to get that new source of microorganisms. That's my best guess.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for answering those questions. And thanks so much for a wonderful night, everyone. Thanks to our great presenters, Gregory, Anne, and Sheila. And thank you so much, Annika, and the Shaw Center of the Salish Sea for being here with us tonight. And thank you to Transition Salt Spring for hosting.